shanedk likes to talk a lot about corporatism, which he uses to refer to the favoritism that some corporations enjoy as a consequence of so-called government interference in the market. What he doesn't know is that this corporatism is actually an inevitable consequence of the historical development of capitalism. In the scientific theory of Marxism-Leninism, it is called monopoly capitalism, and it is the defining character of capitalism in the modern world. Let's step back a moment and consider one of the most basic laws of capitalism. Under capitalism, capital accumulates. This is true in theory because under conditions of free competition, larger businesses are, on average, able to outcompete smaller businesses by specializing labor more totally. Theory is confirmed by history. Since a capitalist political economy first originated in 18th century Britain, the global distribution of wealth has become more and more unequal. There has never been a time since capitalism originated that the world, on the whole, became more equal in its distribution of wealth. Further, there has never been a decrease in inequality within any capitalist country that was not the result of redistribution of wealth. Whenever a market is left to itself, equality decreases and wealth is concentrated in fewer and fewer hands. As a result, those few capitalists who end up holding massive amounts of wealth are inevitably able to buy influence in government. There is no way to prevent this. Capitalism concentrates wealth in a few hands, and in order to become even wealthier, those hands seize the reins of government and put it to their own purposes. Thereby, free market capitalism, which existed in much of Europe and the United States until the late 19th century, brings about its own demise and gives rise to monopoly capitalism. There is no turning back the clock. The greatest achievement of the movement against monopoly capitalism was antitrust legislation, which has proven woefully inadequate to constrain either the role of the monopolists in the economy or their influence on government. The libertarian solution, shanedk's solution, is to reduce the power of government and thereby reduce the power of the monopolists. But this position is folly, because it is impracticable. One may no more force society to return to a lower economic order than one may force an adolescent to return to childhood. The monopoly capitalists are rich enough and powerful enough to buy governments. And if a government cannot be bought, they are rich and powerful enough to create their own, as they have in an endless number of right-wing coups. The inevitability of monopoly capitalism in the modern economy, or corporatism if you prefer, is demonstrated by events following the collapse of the Soviet Union. In Russia, the previous economic order was obliterated by a so-called shock therapy policy, which was intended to invigorate the stagnant Russian economy by the introduction of free market capitalism. The government's policies during the early Yeltsin years could easily have been written by our dear comrade shanedk. "Hands off everything," said the government, and what happened? Almost instantly, wealth was concentrated into a tiny number of hands. A dozen or 2 dozen billionaires were born overnight, and the Russian people became impoverished. Per capita GDP in Russia declined by over 50% between 1991 and 1997, and the newly super-rich aristocracy took control of the government. Today, although Russian per capita GDP has recovered somewhat, it remains extremely concentrated in the hands of a few monopoly capitalists. Russia's experiment in free market libertarianism was an utter failure, and Russia today is a thoroughly monopoly capitalist or corporatist state. There is no future for capitalism. Free market capitalism leads inevitably to monopoly capitalism and all of the concurrent abuses. The only way to a bright future is through the final overthrow of monopoly capitalism, the end of imperialism, and the establishment of a socialist world republic.